July 31, St. Ignatius, Confessor. Although the cycle of the time after Pentecost has shown us many times already the solicitude of the Holy Ghost for the defense of the Church, yet today the teaching shines forth with a new luster. In the 16th century, Satan made a formidable attack upon the Holy City by means of a man who, like himself, had fallen from the height of heaven. A man prevented in early years by the choice graces which lead to perfection, yet unable in an evil day to resist the spirit of revolt. As Lucifer aimed at being equal to God, Luther set himself up against the Vicar of God on the mountain of the covenant, and soon, falling from abyss to abyss, he drew after him the third part of the stars of the firmament of Holy Church. How terrible is that mysterious law whereby the fallen creature, be he man or angel, is allowed to keep the same ruling power for evil which he would otherwise have exercised for good. But the designs of eternal wisdom are never frustrated. Against the misused liberty of the angel or man is set up that other merciful law of substitution, by which St. Michael was first to benefit. The development of St. Ignatius's vocation to holiness followed step by step the defection of Luther. In the spring of 1521, Luther had just quitted Worms, and was defying the world from the castle of Wartburg when Ignatius received at Pamplona the wound which was the occasion of his leaving the world and retiring to Manresa. Valiant as his noble ancestors, he felt within him from his earliest years the warlike ardor which they had shown on the battlefields of Spain. But the campaign against the Moors closed at the very time of his birth. Were his chivalrous instincts to be satisfied with petty political quarrels? The only true king worthy of his great soul revealed himself to him in the trial which put a stop to his worldly projects. A new warfare was opened out to his ambition. Another crusade was begun. And in the year 1522, from the mountains of Catalonia to those of Thuringia, was developed that divine strategy of which the angels alone knew the secret. In this wonderful campaign it seemed that hell was allowed to take the initiative, while heaven was content to look on, only taking care to make grace abound the more when iniquity strove to abound. As in the previous year, Ignatius received his first call 3 weeks after Luther had completed his rebellion. So in this year, at 3 weeks' distance, the rival camps of hell and heaven each chose and equipped its leader. 10 months of diabolical manifestations prepared Satan's lieutenant, in the place of his forced retreat which he called his Patmos. And on March 5, the deserter of the altar and of the cloister left Wartburg. On the 25th of the same month, the glorious night of the Incarnation, the brilliant soldier in the armies of the Catholic kingdom, the descendant of the families of Ignatius and Loyola, clad in sackcloth, the uniform of poverty to indicate his new projects, watched his arms in prayer at Montserrat. Then hanging up his rusty sword at Mary's altar, he went forth to make trial of his future combats by a merciless war against himself. In opposition to the already proudly floating standard of free thinkers, he displayed upon his own this simple device, to the greater glory of God. At Paris, where Calvin was secretly recruiting the future Huguenots, Ignatius, in the name of God of armies, organized his vanguard, which he destined to cover the march of the Christian army, to lead the way, to bear the brunt, to deal the first blows. On August 15, 1534, 5 months after the rupture of England from the Holy See, these first soldiers sealed at Montmartre the definitive engagement which they afterwards solemnly to renew at St. Paul's outside the walls. For Rome was to be the rallying place of the little troop which was soon to increase so wonderfully, and which was, by its special profession, to be ever in readiness, at least signed from the head of the Church, to exercise its zeal in whatever part of the world he should think fit, in the defense or propagation of the faith and for the progress of souls in the doctrine and Christian life. An illustrious speaker of our own day has said, "What strikes us at once in the history of the Society of Jesus is that it was matured at its very first formation. Whosoever knows the first founders of the company knows the whole company, in its spirit, its aim, its enterprises, its proceedings, its methods. What a generation was that which gave it birth! What union of science and activity, of interior life and military life! One may say that they were universal men, men of a giant race, compared with whom we are but insects. Generare gelangelo cubus compare quasi locista videbar." All the more touching, then, was the charming simplicity of those first fathers of the society, making their way to Rome on foot, fasting and weary, but their hearts overflowing with joy, singing with a low voice the Psalms of David. When it became necessary, on account of the urgency of the times, for the new institute to abandon the great traditions of public prayer, it was a sacrifice to several of these souls. Mary could not give way to Martha without a struggle. For so many centuries the solemn celebration of the divine office had been the indispensable duty of every religious family, its primary social debt, and the principal nourishment of the individual holiness of its members. But new times had come, times of decadence and ruin, calling for an exception as extraordinary as it was grievous to the brave company that was risking its existence amidst ceaseless alarms and continual sallies upon hostile territory. Ignatius understood this, and to the special aim imposed upon him he sacrificed his personal attraction for the sacred chance. Nevertheless, to the end of his life, the least note of the psalmody falling on the ears drew tears of ecstasy from his eyes. After his death, the Church, which had never known any interest to outbalance the splendor of worship due to her spouse, wished to return from a derogation which so deeply wounded the dearest instincts of her bridal heart. Paul IV revoked it absolutely, but St. Pius V, after combating it for a long time, was at last obliged to give in. In the latter ages so full of snares, the time had come for the Church to organize special armies. But while it became more and more impossible to accept from these worthy troops continually taken up with outside combats the habits of those who dwelt in security protected by the ancient towers of the Holy City, at the same time Ignatius repudiated the strange misconception that would try to reform the Christian people according to this enforced but abnormal manner of life. The third of the 18 rules which he gives as a crowning of the spiritual exercises to have us the true sediments of the Orthodox Church recommends to the faithful the chants of the Church, the psalms, and the different canonical hours at their appointed times. And at the beginning of this book, which is the treasure of the Society of Jesus, where he mentions the conditions for drawing the greatest fruit from the exercises, he ordains in his 20th annotation that he who can do so should choose for the